Wait, this isn't a Zelda video. I know, shut up, they're coming. But sometimes random inspiration strikes, so here we are. I've been jumping back and forth lately between Final Fantasy 16 and the new Pokemon DLC. And in Pokemon, I've been building a kaiju team. Nothing new, there's tons of lists online about that, but the other day, while I was playing one of the awesome and epic icon battles in Final Fantasy 16, I wondered how easy it would be to similarly find Pokemon comparisons for classic Final Fantasy summons. I tried to do a good blend of visually representing the summons and also matching the concept, since some of the summons change appearances pretty drastically from game to game anyway. And to help organize my thoughts, I set a few ground rules. No mega evolutions or other temporary gimmicks, but regional forms are fine. Elements have to match. Some have leeway because they're non-elemental or use elements not Pokemon, like Holy, but Ifrit must be fire, Shiva must be ice, etc. But yeah, I'm just gonna go summon by summon, starting with the ones I would use and think are the most accurate, and then on to some that don't quite work as well, but are other options if you want to create a summon team. First up is Titan, and I know there's no obvious counterpart. The closest is probably Machoke, but he's not Earth Elemental. I think Golurk works the best, because he is a sentient Earth Golem, even if the Ghost subtype doesn't really fit, and he's kind of a canon, apparently. I don't know, I think of him more like Titan in Final Fantasy 13, where the summons are all Transformers. But if you don't like that pick, a few others that I think work pretty well are Stonejourner, even if he's a goofy design and I don't actually like him, or Regirock, who is arguably the closest in body type, but he just looks so soulless. It's a bit more of a stretch, but I also put Ursaluna on this list as the kind of earthen, hulking brute alternative to Machoke. But he's not my top choice because he's technically four-legged, even though he also stands up. Finally, I threw in Golem because some games have a summon actually called Golem, which is instead of or alongside Titan, so it seemed fitting to give him a shout out. I struggled a lot with Shiva because she's so iconic as a humanoid female summon. Her look has changed from game to game, but she's almost always the same kind of body type. And there just aren't great humanoid ice types in Pokemon. So I settled with Frostlass as the top choice, though again, that ghost type slips in to throw things off. But the fact that this is a specifically female evolution, I think works surprisingly well, even if her design isn't that humanoid. A few other options include Glaceon, which I know is quadrupedal, but she channels the essence of Shiva with the kind of icy hair strands and sleek cyan design. You'd think the most obvious pick would be Jinx, but she's been all but erased from Pokemon, so good luck adding her to a modern team even if you liked her, which I don't. And finally, I figured I'd kick a mention to Regice. It has the same issues as Regirock, but I mean, it is an ice elemental. It just doesn't exactly give off feminine energy. You'd probably expect me to get Ramu as the electric summon, but there's just not many good humanoid options, as I mentioned last time, so I thought I'd mix things up a bit instead because Ixion is the summon that gave me this idea, and it's all because of Zebstrika. Like, it writes itself. This is as obvious as using Volcarona as Mothra. But for the sake of argument, I included a few others thematically similar picks. We've got Jolteon, which is a little more basic, but also more loved. Then we've got a Pokemon that predates Zebstrika, Manectric. Again, not much to say, but it works well enough. Finally, just because I've had other legendary comparisons, I threw in Arceus with the Electric Plate. Is it kind of cheating to use a Pokemon that can be any type? Maybe, but it also works surprisingly well. Plus, I'm not duplicating any of these picks across other summons, so Arceus is locked. It is an electric type now. Leviathan is one of the oldest summons on this list, so naturally I had to include it. And I'm sure everyone has an obvious pick that comes to mind, but That one's also a little basic, so my top choice is actually Melodic. Milotic. Whatever. I love how rare it is, and I think it has this dangerous elegance that matches really well. But naturally, a lot of people jump right to Gyarados, so he's an option too, just not my top pick. And finally, I wanted to shout out Basculegion because it's not quite as Serpentine, but I love its ancient roots, and the design matches up pretty well as kind of a more squat Leviathan. Phoenix is one of my all-time favorite summons. I don't know why, but Final Fantasy XVI has made her even cooler, and I think there's much better options than there would be for Ifrit. That said, I only have two, and I think they're honestly tied as equally viable. First is Moltres, because obviously, look at them side by side. But depending on the game, I've seen Phoenix with more color and majestic plumage, so I could also see Ho-Oh working just as well. Either way, this is one option where I'm going to also include a mention of moveset, because Phoenix's whole thing is healing while hurting, so it's important to include a move like Recover. Though I wish there was a fire move like Giga Drain. That'd be perfect. Last but definitely not least is the king himself, Bahamut. I saved this one because, like in Final Fantasy, it's probably the most overpowered, but also one of the hardest to nail down because the design changes quite a bit from game to game, and it's non-elemental, so the sky's the limit, or space is the limit if it's Bahamut Zero. I mean, most Dragon Legendaries would work for this thing, but the fun is in narrowing it down, so let's start with a non-legendary, Noivern. It's not a perfect comparison, but I think of this as like the proto-Bahamut you'd use in your team until you get the real option late game. It focuses on sound over light, but the design is pretty good. Arguably the best option is Lunala, with abilities based on the moon's light and a large wingspan. If it's too hard to get though, another solid option is the past Paradox Pokemon, Roaring Moon. It has a similar design to Lunala, but it's a little beefier in the body. It's better than Salamence, though. That's a chunky dragon. I know there are chunkier versions of Bahamut, but I don't like them as much. They look too weird. So with my personal list of 6 done, I went down the rabbit hole for a bit and tried to just map as many summons as I could to their Pokemon counterparts. Some with more success than others, but here's some other options you might prefer to use on your team. I hesitated to include such an iconic Final Fantasy creature like Chocobo, but they're a starter summon in a lot of games, and the more I thought about it, the more that made it a fun experiment. They're generally non-elemental, but most Chocobos can't fly, so it made me want to stick with normal type, ruling out a lot of actual birds. But I also remembered that they run around on 2 legs, which eliminates most normal types that aren't birds. It's a little tough. You can basically go 2 ways with this one. Focus on flying types and either don't teach it fly, or you could go with something that's not a bird, but probably moves on 4 legs. Braviary is a pretty obvious pick for the flying option, and probably looks the closest to an actual black chocobo. You can actually use the regular or Hisuian varieties, they both look similar enough. I focus on the other side, with normal type Silvally as one option. I mean, it does kind of have chocobo feet in the front there. Cyclizar is the other option. I mean, it's literally the ride Pokemon. It serves the same purpose as a wild chocobo. But actually, while we're here, Moogle is paired with Chocobo a lot, so let's throw in Woobat and Swoobat as our Moogle stand-ins. Depending on the game, one works better than the other. You know, either like stretched out Moogle body or kind of squat, fluffy guy. Honestly, if they had legs, they might be the best comparison yet. I had to include them. I'm combining Typhon and Atamos because they look pretty similar and are kind of interchangeable depending on the game. But this is another non-elemental summon, so I mostly went off appearance because it's fairly consistent from game to game. The first thing that came to mind was Golbat, and while it might not be the best pick, the mouth at least is spot on. Another decent option is Swalot. Swalot? I don't know. It might not look like it at first glance, but when that massive maw opens, you'd believe it can suck up a castle. We've also got Exploud, which I don't really care for, but it does fit the theme, even if it's more about, like, exploding sound out rather than sucking in. And finally, I don't really understand these Ultra Beasts, or if they should even count, but I can't deny that Guzzlord has big Typhon energy. I just also kinda hate it. Also, shout out to Gengar. I don't think it really fits, but I feel like someone would come at me for not mentioning it. So if you think it works, more power to you. It took long enough, but we finally got to Ifrit, the Fire God. I ended up finding some pretty solid options, but I'm just not as happy with any of them as I was with Phoenix, so that's why he's down here in the backups. My main pick is a little unconventional, but it's Hisuian Arcanine. I know, it's a dog, it's on all fours, but look at that design. The colors and patterning just look the most like Ifrit. And the added rock typing fits well with his attacks, sometimes including like flaming meteors and stuff. But for the sake of argument, most fire starters will work too, like Typhlosion, Emboar, Incineroar, that kind of thing. Obviously none of these picks have horns or look as humanoid, but I had to use what was available, which is why I picked Phoenix for my main team. And speaking of horns, Diablos is another non-elemental summon with horns and wings looking like a proto-Bahamut. But for diversity, I'm kind of melding him together with Hades, who's only shown up a few times, but serves a similar purpose and looks more like a Grim Reaper's. So once again, we're capturing the essence here. I'm trying as much as possible to lead with something that isn't a legendary, so this time we're starting with Houndoom. Could have used him for Ifrit, but I thought it was better here with the Dark type and the Doom branding. If you want something a little more ghoulish, how about Grimmsnarl? Still no wings, but it's a little more fantastical, and if you count its Gigantamax form, which I don't, it's very imposing. And finally, probably the closest option is Darkrai. I mean, he's literally the devil. Do I need to say more? I didn't originally have Carbuncle on this list because the summon doesn't really attack, and its type is hard to nail down. Plus, it looks so different in every appearance. But I found a few comparisons, so I thought I'd include the cute little guy anyway. First is, again, a more thematic option. Espeon has the cute and whimsical factor, and the gem in its head. Plus, its shiny actually looks pretty close to some of the comparisons. Then we've got Carbink, and it's weirdly not an evolution, Diancie, but like, with the name Carbink, it's just asking to be a Carbuncle stand-in. I included them both because they're so similar, and Carbuncle gives me a more legendary Pokemon vibe, but it's definitely closer in appearance to Carbink. And finally, another pretty spot-on comparison is Celebi. I don't really care for its grass type. I didn't even know it had one. I picture Carbuncle more in the fairy psychic realm, but Celebi is also psychic, so it still works, and I mean, it looks pretty spot on to some versions. But I think this is another one where I need to briefly touch on moves, because Carbuncle generally just casts Reflect and then leaves. So the Pokemon version would either need that exact move, you know, the Pokemon version of it, or a similar kind of protective moveset. Even though I wasn't a big fan of any of the comparisons for Ramu, I still had to include him. He's a legend. Which is probably why all of the comparisons are legendaries. I think the most accurate is probably Thundurus. It's got a hint of facial hair, floats on a cloud, and is vaguely humanoid. It's not bad, really, even if it's a little too jacked for my liking. Another pretty decent option is Raikou. Raikou? More animalistic, but the theme is there with the thick mane and the flowing fur like Ramu's cloak. While we're at it, Raging Bolt works too, if you picture the long neck as his flowing robes. I just think the design is a little goofy. I also put Zeraora on here, but it doesn't really work. It was just an act of desperation, I think. Though he does appear cat-like in Final Fantasy Explorers, so there's that. And this last one doesn't count because I said no Megas, but if Mega Ampharos was an actual evolution, I think it'd be the top pick. All that fluffy wool reminds me of his majestic beard, and it stands upright, oozing electrical confidence. Odin is another tough one because he's non-elemental and kind of a 2-for-1 deal. There's the spectral horse, and the man riding it with his big ol' sword. I once again almost didn't include him, but then I saw this image. I don't know the context, but my top pick is Calyrex riding Spectrier. I didn't care for the Gen 8 DLC, so I never actually got to them or anything, but maybe the pick would actually be Spectrier, and the rider is implied. But similar to Ramu, I went ahead and added a few more that are just okay to fill out the list. We've got Mudsdale, who matches the horse pretty well and is a ride Pokemon in Gen 7, so there's that. And finally, Aegislash. This one is a pretty weak comparison. I just really like this Pokemon. But also, one of the most iconic things about Odin is his death-dealing sword, so I figure a sentient ghost sword is at least worth a shout-out. Look, I'm trying. This isn't as easy as giant monsters. Garuda is a summon that's graduated from regular enemy status to full-on summon, and also gotten more popular lately, even taking center stage as one of the main 8 icons in Final Fantasy XVI. But as a wind elemental, it's a little hard to nail down in Pokemon. I went with the grass flying combo to ensure they have wings but are also green. Figured it's close enough. The top pick here is Decidueye. It's not the most accurate by appearance, but Garuda has also changed quite a bit over the years, and I think Decidueye nails the concept at least, with talons and wings, as well as being an archer, which is kind of analogous to wind powers. Next is Scyther, which is more bug-like, yes, but has the sharp edges and kind of slimy appearance that Garuda has. They're both violent beasts that just want to dig in and not let go. And finally, on the cuter side, I threw in Shaman's Skyform. It's not perfect, but it kind of fits some of the earlier Garuda renders. This isn't my favorite summon, anyway. I just included it because it's gotten more popular and might help this video get seen. Hey, at least I'm honest about it. I love Alexander, but I genuinely didn't think I'd find anything that worked for it. It's a holy type summon that's literally a building. There's not a great comparison, but like I said, I still wanted to try. Plus, the new DLC introduced Archulidon, which I realize is a bridge, but it's about the closest we have to a Pokemon shaped like a structure. Gigantamax Duraludon is a lot closer, but they're never bringing that feature back, so who cares? Alexander is a bridge now. Literally the only other Pokemon I could find that was remotely close is another weird Ultra Beast. Stakataka? These things are absurd. It looks like something the Guardians built in Zelda, but it's not a bad comparison. And actually, Celesteela kind of works too. I just don't know if any of them are obtainable outside of Gen 7, so they're a gray area for my list. I also almost put Palossand on here, just for laughs, but the ghost type seemed out of place for a holy type summon, you know? Last and least, I wanted to give a quick shout out to my Final Fantasy IX friends with the exclusive summon Arc, though I just included it as an excuse to talk about Delmise, a Pokemon I regularly forget exists, but is basically a friggin' ghost ship. Or at least part of one. This thing needs more love, including from me. So here you are, Delmise, it's your time to shine. Oh wait, I lied. Get out of here, Delmise. Another Ultra Beast looks even closer. How do you say this? Naganadel? I don't know. I think these things work because they look so little like Pokemon. So after scouring through over 1,000 Pokemon and a handful of Final Fantasy games, that's all I've got for this random crossover. Do you think there's any obvious comparisons I missed? Would you use a team based on Final Fantasy summons? Let me know in the comments. I'm not gonna lie, I'm tempted to scrap my Kaiju team before starting the Indigo Disc DLC and make a new one out of Final Fantasy summons, but I don't know if it would be at all viable for the in-game challenges of that content. Then again, my Kaiju team has issues too. There's always going to be sacrifices when using these gimmick teams, but it's still fun to speculate. See you next time, probably with Zelda content. I promise I haven't forgotten, I just get distracted by other projects. I had a whole friggin' Christmas movie project over on TikTok that kept me busy for a month. Go check that out if you missed me. Anyway, I'm just rambling over the end card at this point. Hope you all had a great holiday and a strong start to your 2024.